Good Tuesday night to you. I am Thabo Mdluli, and thank you very much for joining us tonight here on In Focus. Of course, all the news around the formation of various municipalities and the councils sitting for the first time, particularly here in Gauteng, a clean sweep for the Blue Movement with the win in the Johannesburg Metro, the Ekurhuleni Metro, as well as we're learning today in Tshwane. We're asking the question tonight, does the EFF, Action SA and DA relationship stand the test of time? Will this relationship succeed? Will they still be in government in 4 months? Put that question to political analysts as well as independent analysts tonight, and a little bit later on we'll put that same question to the political parties who form some of these coalitions. Meanwhile, the DA's Randall Williams has been re-elected the mayor of Tshwane without a contest. This comes after the ANC distanced itself from participating in the election process. William believes that the Metro still has a long way to go to fix some of the service delivery issues. He addressed members of the media shortly after his re-election.
Well, what I did find quite surprising was the fact that my nomination was unopposed. I expected that the ANC would also nominate a candidate. But the result is pleasing for us, but it means it comes with a lot of responsibility. We've got a city that's in trouble. And so far I've worked at it for 12 months when I was elected as mayor, and we still have a lot of work to do. And we have a long way to go, and hopefully we can all work together in council. All the parties should work together and put the interests of the residents first. And hopefully we will stop fighting and concentrate more on service delivery. And I believe we can do it. We can turn the city around, and we can turn the city of Tshwane into one of the best cities in the world if we all work together.
Williams says it's important to sign the coalition government agreements with other political parties, as this will guarantee stability during his tenure.
I can relate to my 12 months experience where I ran a minority government without any issues, and we were able to function normally. I had a 44% vote in council, but we all learned to work together because being placed under administration was not an enjoyable experience.
Right now, are you going for the minority government?
No. Negotiations are continuing. Like I said, we haven't finalized the coalition agreements, but as we put it, our leaders put it, there must be signed coalition agreements, and these coalition agreements must be made public. So we will continue to pursue. And as some in the IEC even state, maybe we must rethink that after election results have been promulgated, that political parties are only given 2 weeks to put coalitions together. You get countries like Germany, they've been running coalition governments since the late 1940s. They don't give their parties 2 weeks. They even give the majority party a month to put the coalition together. And if the majority party can't, they give the second party a chance to put coalitions together. So we still have a long way to go to entertain the impact that going forward in South Africa, because of proportional representation system, we are going to have coalition governments, and we're going to move more and more towards coalition governments, and we need to amend our legislation to make provision for that.
Yesterday's developments in the votes for mayor and speaker in both Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni Metros came as a surprise to everyone, including us at the DA. We didn't ask for help from the EFF to lead these governments, and we did not expect to leave these two meetings with two new DA mayors, and both these metros first ever female mayors. The EFF and Action SA's support for our candidates came with no strings attached. And everyone who voted in support of a DA candidate yesterday knew that we would not allow a gun to be held to our head in this arrangement.
Right now, some insight and analysis. We're joined in conversation by Professor Amanda Gouws. We also have Asanda Ngoasheng as well as Ongama Mtimka joining us tonight. Good evening to you all. Please unmute, and thank you very much for joining us in this conversation. That's exactly where we start. According to the leader of the Democratic Alliance, the first priority will be to ensure that stability in government is secured and work to solidify coalition agreements with the parties that share their governing principles and their commitment to the people. He says, if we get this right, today could be a start of a bright new chapter for the cities. My question is, will they get it right? Professor Gouws, good evening.
Good evening. Well, you know, what happened here were parties voting together actually to keep the ANC out of power. These are not coalitions in the true sense of the word, in the sense that there were agreements in place before the election of the mayors. So, you know, where the EFF, for example, voted for a DA mayor, we have to ask the question, will this continue when it comes to policy issues on which parties need to vote later on? So I am quite concerned about the fact that these coalitions will be, or, you know, the formations, because I don't think one can call them coalitions at this point, will be quite unstable. And if we see that 2 women have been elected mayors, now that is actually a victory for gender equality. But my fear is that these women have been set up for failure because they will now have to oversee very unstable and very conflictual coalitions formed by many different parties with very divergent ideologies.
Yeah. Asanda, the lead up to these local government elections, leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, said, we will not be part of any voting bloc that is dependent on the EFF. Earlier on today, a leader of Action SA, President of Action SA, Hemi Mashaba, said, well, if they are going into any talks with the DA, which, I mean, those talks themselves are strange because they've rewarded them already. They say, no, we'll reward you first and then we'll go talk later. But if we are going into those talks, we are dragging the EFF along, otherwise those talks are not going to happen. Will the DA here have to go back on that statement that they made on the build-up to these local government elections?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely I agree with Professor and the assertion that this is not a coalition. These are not people who are together ideologically or even politically. These are people who have come together against a common enemy. And there's a big problem when people come together against a common enemy, because the minute the enemy is removed, you then have to figure out how you relate and how you are going to work together. And this is where the proof is going to be in the pudding. And I also share the sentiments and the fear that has been shared earlier, that these are going to be very unstable governments. These are going to be very unstable coalitions in inverted commas. And we've seen this already in Nelson Mandela Bay with the UDM and the DA. We've seen it also with the DA and its coalition partners in Johannesburg. And both of them ended very badly. And so the problem I have with the way in which things have been gone is that, yes, the ANC is no longer, holding the kind of power that it held before. And the ANC has been relegated to this seemingly rural party. Great. Let's all celebrate, except for one thing. First of all, the ANC continues to be the biggest opposition and will give people a run for its money. It's not as if it's just disappeared. Second of all, you have people who continue to tell us that there is no contract that they have signed. The EFF reiterates this at every single opportunity, that they haven't signed any contract, which means this coalition, this collaboration is literally being held together by Bostik or by Press-Stick or by, sticky tape. And what the EFF, we know the EFF does this. What they're planning to do is that at every point that these executive mayors need to make ideologically difficult decisions, they are going to have to go to Action SA. They're going to have to go to the EFF and say, oh, we want to do this. Is it okay? And the EFF is going to throw its choice out of the court, is going to postulate, is going to do what the EFF does. And this is where I have concern, because these tactics are not in the interest of the voter. They are not in the interest of South Africa. They are not in the interest of service delivery. All they are is serving the political means to an end of political parties who find themselves with an enemy that just refuses to die, because that's what the ANC has become. And my fear is that although they can be together against the enemy that is the ANC, they may not be able to find each other ideologically. Just look at a political party like the DA and its ideology, and a political party like the EFF and its ideology. And my second fear is that these parties may be setting themselves up for failure in 2024 elections, because voters have already started calling on Julius Malema on Twitter to say, I don't think you are representing my vote correctly if you are going to go with the DA voting bloc. And so voters might just punish both Action SA and the EFF in the upcoming election, because not wanting the ANC does not automatically mean wanting the DA. And that is where the toughness is going to be in this deal, and that is a big risk that everybody is taking of whether this will stick. And I don't know that it will stick. And if it does, I don't know how long it's going to stick for.
Let's take a break. When we come back, Ongama Mtimka, we get you to weigh in on that. Can the Democratic Alliance sustain this position of voting support in key metros in Gauteng without any expectation from the other parties who are supporting it? We'll get a reaction to that in a moment. Stay with us. Okay, with you tonight with Professor Amanda Gouws. We have Asanda Ngoasheng as well as Ongama Mtimka with us tonight. And getting your views as well, 072-110-5584. And the question we ask you tonight, does the EFF-DA Action SA no-string-attached relationship have a chance of succeeding? What are your thoughts tonight? Or you can tweet us at Newzroom 405. Ongama Mtimka, welcome. Good to have you with us. Can the DA sustain this position of votes with no expectation?
That's an interesting one. So, first of all, there's a lot to be said about the coalitions. First, one, the fluid nature of the relationships that make up the coalitions, or what I will call the emergent structures of government. Two, the vindictive voting, and then the strategic voting. And I want to talk about, in answering your question, the approach of the DA. Do they want to actually retain it in this way? Because as we heard John Steenhuisen, he said they had, and corporates distinguish between deliberate and emergent strategy. They had a deliberate strategy of at least coming out with minority governments because they had rejected some of the moves by the smaller parties. So it was not a deliberate strategy for them to have the EFF and Action SA vote with them. Now, it's an emergent strategy. The question is, do they want to secure it and consolidate it? If you listen to John Steenhuisen, it's what has happened, the emergence has brought them to the table enough to think about how do you secure what you have. So that's interesting because it shows that these parties have succeeded in their strategic gambit. If it was to say, we will put you in, and then what do you do with it? Do you come back to the negotiation table, and what happens from here? But beyond the tactical maneuvering of the parties, sir, the issue here is, what is it that the parties in their creative thinking about the process are still not doing? My view is that they are still stuck on the idea that local government politics has got to be characterized by competitive rivalry, when the law allows them to think differently and to do things differently. The municipal councils are different from provincial and national government in the sense that both executive and lawmaking or legislative power is with municipal councils. As a result of that, you don't have to structure things such that you have a governing coalition versus a opposition party. It doesn't have to be in local government. In local government, you can drop the executive mayoral system, resort to a collective executive system, in terms of which the executive leadership of a municipality is actually representative of all the parties in council. Yeah. And when you do that, you do away with opposition versus governing coalition and create a much more sustainable path. And I think that this is something that should have been done. Yeah. It was not a foregone conclusion that politics has got to be zero-sum in these municipalities where it does not make sense. Yeah. Where it was not possible to have a coalition that leads with a margin above 5 seats, the bar is so low. it was not necessary to have a government that's going to continue to rely on the vote of others to pass municipal budgets.
So legally, where would that change need to happen? Would province need to change that system from the mayoral system to a collective leadership system? And what would then that look like? Because all these other parties will say, oh, well, now the ANC wants to change the system all of a sudden because they have lost.
I think there's a degree of interpretation that has to be done, because it's provinces who declare the system used in a municipality. But the law gives a right to participate. So because it's existing councils that we're talking about. So that can't just be imposed by province in my interpretation of the law, but it's in the realm of the ambiguous as to how the process happens. Does the municipal council itself vote to change its own executive system and then have province gazette it? Or can it be imposed by the province? There, I think it's ambiguous to me when I read the Structures Act, but I'd be happy if any of my colleagues have got some clarity as to how that happens from a process point of view. But when the initial declaration of a municipality and what type of a municipality it is, that responsibility rests with province.
Professor Gouws, is a minority government still a win?
Well, I agree with my colleague here that the Municipal Structures Act allows for an executive committee. So you don't have to have an executive mayor. You can have a committee, and then it works on consensus, and it's much better for a coalition. But what we're going to see now is that because there were no agreements in place before these mayors were elected, the DA may say, I'm not going to go, I have no agreement with the EFF, I have no agreement with Action SA. So, and that's a minority government, right? It's a minority party that hasn't got 50% or more of the vote. How does a party then make sure that it gets the support for policy decisions? And that's not clear to me, because I think the EFF, if we talk about strategic here, it's a very cunning strategy. It will look at what is on the table and it will say, well, I'm going with this or I'm not going with this. Yeah. And then, the DA will really be in a between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. So I mean, they'll be stymied here in a sense. So instead of being able to barrel forward and implement policies, they're going to find themselves having to spend a lot of time consulting widely with backbenchers who are happening to be kingmakers in this particular instance.
Exactly, and that leads to the politics of paralysis, right? So you need to do, there may be policies that's urgent. We know that dysfunctional state of service delivery, there are things that have to be delivered soon, and, things around water, electricity, and so on. And then you can't get consensus. So that's the politics of paralysis.
Asanda, minority governments in their nature, as you've articulated, end up being that, some kind of a consultative process wide enough. And could then the standing and the falling of these municipalities be almost linked to the support of smaller parties?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that things have turned out have shown us that South Africans are looking for a dilution of power from those who have power. But I think that there's a misinterpretation of the secondary part of that. So people want the ANC out, yes, but does it mean they want the DA in? Not necessarily. People want Action SA to participate in the debates and the conversations that are happening. But does that mean that they give the, Action SA the mandate to collaborate with the DA? Not necessarily. And same with the EFF. And I think that for me, if I was, leading these political parties, I would already be thinking about how I'm going to convince my voters that the way in which I voted as a bloc was the best thing for South Africa, because we only have 2 years to the national election. And if they happen to be stuck in a government by paralysis and nothing happens and there's no service delivery in the next 2 years, this decision to create voting blocks is going to be the chalice around their neck that they can't get rid of. And 2 years is not a long enough time to be able to work through some of the kinks of political parties that are so far apart ideologically. I use particularly the DA and the EFF because they are so far from each other that to get to a process of finding each other is going to take time. And there will be delays potentially in passing things precisely because you now have, 4, 5, 6 people to consult. And I think that, we mustn't be scared of being clear and open and honest that while the ANC has abused its power, there's a certain level of stability in having one political party leading and making decisions. And while for democracy it's not a good thing to have one political power guaranteed that they will get the quorum and be able to make the decisions, which I think is what people were going for, that they wanted a dilution, that the ANC cannot just come and say this is going to happen and then it happens and they don't even need to consult anybody. But I don't know if people were pushing for this kind of government that we're going to have now of peace, that is being held up, as I said, by Bostic and could fall apart at any stage. Yeah. Because remember, you need political stability. You need a united government in order to be able to deliver services to people. You need a united government and people who agree with each other to pass the budget that is going to put the money that is required for service delivery to make things happen. 2 years, multiple parties, ideological differences, and I don't know if these political parties are necessarily able. Let me clarify. I think that South African politicians are definitely able. We are a diverse country and we are used to diversity of ideology. But the question is, will there be political maturity?
Yeah.
The EFF, I don't see it having the political maturity. Even Action SA, to some instance, I don't necessarily see them having the political maturity. Even the decision to tie themselves to the EFF, to my mind, is slightly questionable because ideologically, they are not necessarily on the same path because the Action SA is actually quite a capitalist political party. And the EFF is very much socialist. And so there are a lot of questions about the kind of ideological muddying and the kind of jumps that they want people who voted for them to be able to make, because you vote for Action SA because you want certain things that are driven by a capitalistic ideology and a free market ideology. And you vote for the EFF because you want things that are driven by a socialist ideology. And now you're presented with this, mixed masala. And then it joins an even bigger mixed masala with the DA at the lead.
A quick one here, Ongama. Let's squeeze it in if we can. A bit of a minute or so that is left. If there was saving grace here, it would be a fact that political parties would be afraid of a snap election. Do you get a sense at all that any of these parties are at all concerned about a rerun of elections? Sorry, you're muted, Ongama. You can unmute, please.
Notwithstanding the assurances of both the DA and the ANC to the contrary, I think that the threat of an election will actually force either of them to actually consider some of the compromises that are there. Elections are very expensive. And in fact, the argument is that some people think that there's something wrong with the voter in terms of where they are. My view is if you had a rerun tomorrow, you would have hung councils in the very same places where there are hung councils, precisely because voters are, this story is a story of the rejection of party dominance, which is, in my view, going to be permanent in 2024, 2026, and what it will crystallize into will become clearer around 2029. So there shouldn't be the feeling that if we went to an election, there would be different outcomes and that South Africans would all of a sudden vote for party dominance. I don't see that in the short term. In fact, what we'll see is more and more councils, more and more provinces are going to fall into coalitions until this trend consolidates, say, around about 2029.
An era of coalition governments is what Ongama Mtimka is suggesting we have come into. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming through. Professor Amanda Gouws, Asanda Ngoasheng, as well as Ongama Mtimka with us tonight. In Focus continues in a moment to put the very same questions to political parties who form these coalition governments and what they think are chances of a sustainability of these now state councils. Stay with us.